Welcome to the Unstressed Exec, the podcast where we dive deep into the real conversations that help you lead, love, and live with greater clarity, courage, and calm. I'm your host, Dr. George Vergolias, executive coach and clinical forensic psychologist, and I help high-achieving professionals navigate life transitions, resolve conflict with confidence, and build unshakable psychological resilience. So if you're ready to lead with purpose, master conflict with grace, and become more emotionally agile under pressure, you're in the right place. Let's get started. Welcome back to the Unstressed Exec, where we talk about how to perform, lead, and live with clarity, calm, and confidence, even when life feels like it's coming apart at the seams. I'm your host, Dr. George Vergolias, forensic psychologist, executive and resilience coach, and someone who has spent over 2 decades helping people understand the psychology of attachment, trauma, and the invisible forces that keep us stuck in relationships long after the damage is clear. Before we dive in, if these episodes are resonating with you and you want to go deeper, I highly recommend check out my workbook, The Conflict Whisperer, From Conflict to Clarity, a no-nonsense guide to managing conflict in every relationship. It's packed with over 75 reflection exercises, neuroscience-backed tools, and practical frameworks to help you break reactive cycles, rebuild self-trust, and navigate high-conflict relationships with clarity. It's available now on Amazon, and I'll leave a link in the show notes. Now, today's episode is for anyone who has ever said to themselves, I know this relationship is hurting me, so why can't I let go? This episode is titled Breaking Trauma Bonds, Why You Stay, Why It Hurts, and How to Finally Walk Away. Let's open with a quick discussion of what a trauma bond really is. Let's start with a crucial distinction. A trauma bond is not love. It's not loyalty, it's not weakness, and it's not stupidity. A trauma bond is a neurological attachment formed through cycles of emotional pain and intermittent reward. Pain and reward, pain and reward. The term was first described by psychologist Patrick Carnes in 1997 in his work on addictive relationships. Trauma bonds form when care and harm are intertwined, affection is unpredictable. So affection happens, but it's unpredictable, so intermittent reinforcement. Safety and danger both coexist. Another way to maybe reframe that is safety and excitement coexist. Validation is given and then withdrawn. So it's push-pull, push-pull. In their words, the relationship becomes the source of both the wound and the relief. I think that's a great way to think about it. So the person you're with is both the poison and the antidote to the poison. It's both the poison and the treatment. And that is what creates the cycle. And that is the trauma bond. And this is why logic fails in these relationships. This is why just leave doesn't work. When your best friend says, just leave him, just leave her, it's really hard to do it because it isn't just a rational decision. It isn't only happening at the cognitive rational level. There's something going on much deeper emotionally and even unconsciously. You're not attached to the person, you are attached to the cycle. It's really important to, at the outset of this episode, identify that. You think you're attached to the person, you're attached to this cycle of back and forth. So why do trauma bonds hurt so much? Well, trauma bonds are uniquely painful because they hijack the brain's reward system. And we know this from neuroscience research because it shows that intermittent reinforcement, unpredictable rewards, is the most powerful conditioning schedule known to psychology. This goes back to the work of B.F. Skinner in the 1950s. But the same mechanism drives gambling addiction, slot machines, and abusive relationships. It's the idea that I'm going to engage in a behavior and then every 5th or 10th or 15th time, I'm going to get a reward. And what that tells me then is I need to engage in it even more to get the reward. If I engaged in a behavior and 100 times in a row, nothing good came of it, I'd eventually give up. The behavior would extinguish. We call that extinction, behavioral extinction. But in intermittent reinforcement is happening periodically over time and it deepens the pattern. So when affection is inconsistent, your brain releases dopamine during the reconciliation or the repair moments. It's not stability. So instead of moving towards a stable reward, we get addicted to the intermittent reward. Add in oxytocin, the bonding hormone, and cortisol, the stress hormone, and you create a biochemical loop that mimics addiction. Insel found this in 2010, Thomas Insel. So between the dopamine and the oxytocin and the cortisol all together, that's where you end up getting into this cycle under the trauma bond. And this is why the highs in that relationship feel euphoric, the lows feel absolutely devastating, and separation feels like withdrawal or feels like you're losing yourself. Trauma bonds don't hurt because you love deeply. Trauma bonds hurt because your nervous system is trapped in a stress reward loop that it can't regulate on its own. Or you don't believe you can regulate it on its own. I want to be clear, you can regulate this, but it comes with awareness, consciousness, and taking the right steps to move forward. So why is it that smart, capable people stay? We all have seen this, right? We all have loved ones or friends that are in relationships, and we look at it and say, what the hell are you doing with this person? What are you doing with this loser? What are you doing with this toxic person in your life? You're bright, you're capable, you make good money, you're successful, you're emotionally intelligent. It doesn't make sense. Well, at a logical level, it doesn't make sense, but at an emotional level, it makes a ton of sense. One of the most damaging myths about trauma bonds is that they only affect weak people. In reality, trauma bonds most often trap high achievers, caregivers, empathic professionals, leaders, people with high responsibility and low self-priority. Research on betrayal trauma by Jennifer Freed, and this was in the mid-1990s, shows that when someone is emotionally dependent on a relationship, either psychologically or socially, the brain suppresses threat awareness in order to preserve the attachment. We subjugate or we downplay the threat in order to keep the connection. In plain English, your brain chooses connection over protection. Add in attachment history. If you grew up with emotional inconsistency, conditional love, a parent who oscillated between warmth and withdrawal, your nervous system learned early that love is unstable. Love equals instability. This is just what love is. This is just what marriage is. This is just what relationships are. That's why when I and my ex-wife were navigating the decision of whether we were going to separate and then eventually how we would separate, it was critical for us. We came to a realization that the marriage we had, the relationship we had, is not the right message to give our kids on what a loving adult relationship should be. And we saw that, fortunately, we both saw that together. And ever since, we've been very amicable because we came to that realization. It was painful. It wasn't easy for either of us. But we did not want our kids to grow up with a sense that, well, that's just what marriage is. There's going to be fights and arguing. And no. But when you have come up that way, or when your early experiences in high school or college or even young adulthood in relationships were such that that's what you believed, you might have equated that, well, this is just relationships are. Relationships have a lot of pain. Relationships take a lot of work. Marriage takes a lot of work. As adults, that instability feels familiar, even magnetic. You don't stay because you're broken. You stay because your nervous system was trained to survive chaos. It's critical that we become aware of that. Let me talk a little bit more about the trauma bond cycle. I did cover this in some past episodes, but in a slightly different context, but it's worth repeating here. So it's important to realize that trauma bonds follow a predictable pattern. It starts with idealization. That brings intense connection. You feel seen, chosen, special. The person might love bomb you. It moves on to devaluation. Now comes criticism, withdrawal, emotional coldness, a desire to control or manipulate. The next phase is distress. When that devaluation occurs, you then start feeling distressed. You work harder to restore connection. Self-doubt creeps in. You start thinking it's you, not them. You worry about that. You start obsessing over what are you doing? Why don't they love you enough? Why aren't you good enough? The next phase is intermittent repair. Apologies, affection. They make promises. The honeymoon phase kind of returns, but it's only waning. It's brief. But they're coming back around to try to repair the relationship. But it's only to pull you back in and to reestablish the connection. And then reinforcement. Your brain learns if you endure pain, you will receive relief. If you put up with the bullshit long enough, it will get better. And then you'll feel good again. Over time, your identity shrinks around the relationship. You lose clarity, you lose confidence, you lose yourself. The bond tightens, not because the relationship is healthy, but because the cycle is addictive. And that's the problem with the trauma bond. And over time, that becomes very either overtly addictive to us or it just becomes super familiar in a way that that's all we know. So that's all we expect out of relationships. A couple of years back, I worked with a senior executive, and I'm just going to call him Ryan for sake of our purposes today. And on paper, he was powerful, articulate, well-respected, confident. But in private, he really felt trapped in a volatile relationship marked by a lot of emotional withdrawal and a lot of explosive reconciliation. So big, heated arguments and fights, days of cold, silent treatment, and then love bombing. So then they would get back together with kind of this intense reconciliation. And that was the pattern. And he said to me, every time I decide to leave, they pull me back in. And I hate myself for going back, but I feel like I can't help it. And at the time, what he didn't understand until we unpacked it in our coaching work together was that his nervous system was addicted to the relief, not to the person. It was never really about this person being so wonderful. It was about the relief. It was about the dopamine hit that would come when they would reconnect. And once we reframed the relationship as a neurobiological loop and framed it within his nervous system regulation, he realized it isn't a moral failure anymore. His shame decreased and his agency, his sense of control returned. And that was the turning point. Because understanding replaces self-blame. When we understand, when we can bring conscious what was unconscious and bring insight, then self-blame goes away because we realize that, yes, we had some responsibility in shaping the relationship, but it wasn't our fault. We were operating out of our old patterns. But now that we're aware of them, we can make a choice to do it differently. And that is a very powerful place to be. So why is it, like in Ryan's situation, why does leaving often feel impossible? Well, the reason is that leaving a trauma bond doesn't feel like a breakup. It's not just a breakup, because what it also feels like is panic, grief, withdrawal, identity loss, existential dread, or a total annihilation of the self in some extreme cases. It feels like I'm not just losing this person in my life, I'm completely losing who I am. And in a way you are, because you gave up so much of yourself, so much of your authenticity to be in the relationship because of the manipulation that was going on. But remember, you're not really losing yourself. You're losing a sense of control that you gave up in the relationship, but you're actually reconnecting to that. You're regaining that control by taking decisive steps forward. And we know this from studies on attachment loss. Hoffer in 1994 put out a study that showed that separation from an attachment figure activates the same brain regions as physical pain. So said another way, when we lose an emotional attachment to a figure, it could be, and that's part of grief, by the way, it's breakup. It could be in a relationship. It could be death of a loved one. It could be moving across country from a best friend. The parts of the brain that register that really don't make a distinction between that and physical pain. So when people say, I feel like I'm dying without them, they're not being dramatic. They're describing a physiological reality. This is why willpower alone doesn't work. Now, we need to try to summon a degree of willpower, right? Whether it's no contact or not stalking their social media feeds and things like that. Like there are some good behaviors that we want to instruct ourselves to be consistent on, but willpower alone will not work. Trauma bonds must be disrupted, not debated. We have to disrupt them by bringing awareness and consciousness to them, understanding the patterns behind them, and then moving forward accordingly. And this is why I think when you're in a trauma bond scenario and you're going through a separation, a divorce, a breakup, and it's a difficult one, and you can't quite make your way out, this is why getting connected to a therapist or a trauma informed or clinically informed coach like myself, I think is critical. I'm not saying that other coaches can't do good work, but in this case, because we're talking about trauma bonding and for many of us, a trauma history, having that clinical nexus, that clinical background, I think is really relevant to doing the work. So how do we break the trauma bond? How do we break it? Breaking a trauma bond requires 3 coordinated shifts, and I'm going to review those now. First, interrupt the cycle. You cannot heal while the cycle continues. I've often referred to it this way. You cannot heal if you're staying in the same environment that traumatized you or that harmed you. It doesn't mean we can't heal if there isn't some disruption. Like we could stay in the relationship, but we have to change the cycle. We have to interrupt the cycle. And this often requires no contact or structured contact, blocking access, removing emotional hooks so they can't pull you in, and eliminating hope-based conversations are those conversations where you're going into it or they're going into it with an eye to instilling some hope for the future. Like one day, maybe we can work it out. That keeps you on the hook. They don't want to pull you into the boat, to use the fish analogy. They don't want to pull you into the boat. They just want to keep you on the hook in the water. This isn't cruelty if you do these things. It's nervous system first aid. It's nervous system regulation. You have to start with interrupting the cycle. Secondly, you have to stabilize the nervous system. Trauma bonds live in the body, not the intellect. This is why they're not rational in the way that we think of it. This is why you know that you need to leave somebody, or you know that that breakup was a good thing for you. And everyone in your life is telling you, but you can't feel it yet. Why? Because it is in the body. It's emotional and physical. It's not intellectual. But healing requires some things. It requires regulation practices, grounding, movement, physical activity, physical movement, breath work. So you're anchored in your body and you're centered, having social supports that are in place that get you and support you, and somatic awareness, physical awareness, aware of what your body's going through, aware of what your body's feeling. Dr. Bessel van der Kolk notes it this way: the body keeps score. I think that's so beautifully stated. It really keeps score. If we're not regulating our body and our nervous system through movement and breath work and awareness of what's going on and what we're feeling, we're missing a huge component here. You can't think your way out of a physiological loop. You just can't. Another key aspect here is you need to rebuild identity and self-trust. What so many people don't realize in this mode of separation, divorce, when they feel betrayed, is that you stop trusting yourself. You stop trusting your own judgment. And when you do that, that kind of haunts the next relationship you might go into. So it's critical to rebuild your identity and your self-trust. Trauma bonds collapse your sense of self. Because again, the person hurt you and they not only got you to distrust them, which makes some sense, but they got you to distrust your own self, your own judgment. So recovery, what does that look like? Well, recovery means reclaiming your values, strengthening your boundaries, rebuilding your intuition so it's on firm bedrock and you can trust it, and practicing small acts of autonomy to take that power back, and tolerating emotional discomfort without being rescued. Living with the emotional discomfort without running into drugs or alcohol, finding the next exciting love interest that's going to love bomb you, or even worse, going back to your ex. You need to tolerate some discomfort here and live in it. This is where coaching and therapy accelerate healing, not to analyze the past endlessly, but to retrain the present. You really do have to retrain your nervous system going forward. And so let's say you did all this. You took some of my input on this episode and last week's episode, and you're asking, okay, well, when do I know I've arrived, right? What's the moment I know that I'm set free? Well, here it is. There's a quiet moment in the recovery process that no one really talks about. And it's not when you stop missing them. It's when the chaos stops feeling familiar. It's when you start feeling the trigger of the chaos and it feels alien to you. It feels off. It feels like nails on a chalkboard. It feels like when you put something in your mouth and it's sour or it went bad or it went rancid and you immediately spit it out because you know it just doesn't taste or feel right. That's when you know that you're free now. When calm no longer feels boring, when peace becomes the priority, when your body can exhale, when clarity returns in terms of your values, your character, what you want in a relationship. That's when the trauma bond breaks. Not because you stopped caring, but because you started caring about yourself again. The one way I think about this, and I use this a lot in my coaching, is think back to a prior relationship. And you may need to go back to high school or college. And you broke up and it wasn't a great breakup and you felt bad and you grieved the process. When did you know that you were over that person? I mean, truly over them, not kidding yourself and telling yourself cognitively in your head. When did you physically and emotionally know you were over that person? And many of you might be thinking, well, when I found a new person, but the reality is it wasn't when you found a new person. You knew you were over them when you heard about them. Hey, so-and-so got a new job. So-and-so got into grad school. So-and-so's dating someone now. So-and-so got married, and it didn't bother you anymore. You just said, oh, that's good for them. I'm happy for them. Great for them. That's when you know you're truly over them. They have no more hold on you. Garrison Keillor, the long-term host of A Prairie Home Companion, has a great quote that he said many years ago. And here's the quote. That's what you do when you're angry with someone. You keep them close to your life. Or you keep them a part of your life. And I love that quote. Because when we're angry and jaded and bitter, and when we're generally not over somebody, we are keeping them very close because they still trigger us. They still loop us in. We still get upset when we hear about them or hear about, and heaven forbid if they're doing well in their life, it really annoys us. But when we know we're over somebody, great, good for them. I don't care either way. I don't wish them any harm, but I'm happy for them. Great. I've got my own life. That's when you know. And when you made that pivot is when you started caring about yourself more. And that's the key. That's where we want to get to. All right, let me give you some closing reflections. If you're in a trauma bond, hear this clearly. You're not broken. You're not weak. You're not addicted to that person. You are caught in a biological loop that once helped you survive and now needs to be gently, firmly dismantled. Healing is not about forgetting them. It's about remembering yourself before you met them. It's about getting back in touch with who you are, what your values are, what your character is, what your priorities are. That's what it's about. And so often we focus on the other. Instead, we need to be focusing in the mirror on us, on ourselves. If today's episode hit home and you're ready to move from insight to action, I highly recommend check out my workbook, The Conflict Whisperer, From Conflict to Clarity, a no-nonsense guide to managing conflict in every relationship. This isn't fluff. It's practical, no bullshit guide designed to help you break reactive cycles, strengthen emotional boundaries, and navigate those difficult relationships with clarity and confidence. It's available now on Amazon. I will leave a link in the show notes. As always, thank you for being here, for doing the work, and for choosing to be the calm in the storm. Now, a quick call to action. Insight without action changes nothing. If you're ready to turn awareness into movement and stress into strategy, coaching can be the catalyst. Coaching will change you. Reach out to set up a free consultation. You can find me at www.theunstressedexec.com or on TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube as The Unstressed Exec. Let's create real momentum starting now. Until next time, I'm Dr. George Vergolias, The Unstressed Exec. Thanks for listening. See you soon. And remember, shift happens.